Hi everyone, my name is Michael Godwin and I live in Perth, Western Australia. My wife is from Odessa, which is a city in Ukraine. I lived there for 4 years teaching English, which is where I met my wife. I have a relatively good understanding of the history and politics from an outsider's perspective, and so I've decided to make this video to help Australians understand the situation in Ukraine. As I too didn't understand where Odessa was or anything about Ukraine many years ago before I moved there. Like many people, I thought it was just something to do with Russia, but it's a lot more complicated than that, so I will try to simplify things to make it easier for people to understand. Forgive me if I seem a little tired. My wife and I have had almost no sleep for the last 3 days. We also have a newborn, and to be honest, my wife has had like 3 hours sleep in the last 3 days. She's just been constantly working on visa stuff, and we've both been glued to the news, trying to get in touch with people. And also my wife's parents have basically been caught in the middle, thankfully not in the most dangerous cities where stuff's happening, but it's been pretty serious nonetheless. Okay, so I'm going to do my best to answer some basic questions and help people get a basic understanding of what's going on. And hopefully I'll be able to give you some information which might help you visualize things a little better. So a question people ask is, what is Ukraine? Yes, it's a philosophical question, but here are some facts to give you about Ukraine in general. It's the second largest country in Europe. It's a very large landmass. Obviously here in Australia we have a very large country as well. So it's probably about I'd say about half the size of Australia, but that's a very rough guess, so don't quote me on that. It's a major agricultural producer for Europe, producing huge amounts of wheat and fresh produce. Ukraine also has extremely fertile soil. The population is roughly 44 million people. It became independent from the Soviet Union in August 1991. It used to be a nuclear power, but they traded that in for concessions that its sovereignty would be respected, and that's now been violated twice. I won't go into huge amounts of detail with that. You can look that up if you want more detail. There are around 40,000 Ukrainians living in Australia, mainly in the eastern states, and many have been begging the Australian government for action in relation to visas and also to send military help. Okay, another question which is generally asked, is Ukraine part of Russia? And the answer to that is no. No, it is not part of Russia. They are not the same country. Okay, so Ukraine became independent in 1991 after the collapse of the Soviet Union. The vast majority of Ukrainians are fiercely patriotic and do not harbor any love for Russia or for Putin. They do not want to be part of Russia. Okay, there is a small minority, however, who do, but I can't stress this enough. It's a very small minority, okay? We're talking less than 1% of the country. Okay, if I had a guess, I don't have that percentage written down somewhere, okay? Another question which people might ask, don't they all just speak Russian? The country of Ukraine has Ukrainian as the official language, which is different from Russian. Okay, they have similar etymological roots, but they are not the same language. It's like a mixture, if I had to describe it to people, it's like a mixture of Polish and Russian, but it actually predates Russian as a language. My wife speaks Russian. And she speaks fluent Ukrainian as a second language as well. And in some cities in Ukraine, Russian is the dominant language. For example, in Odessa, where I lived and taught English, or in Kherson and in other parts of the east, what you'll notice is that when you go around Ukraine, different cities, and when you get to small villages, people will speak a mixture of both. Which has its own special name called Surzhyk. Okay, so to say that everybody speaks Russian is absolutely not true, and the main language of Ukraine, or the bureaucracy, is in Ukrainian. Okay, they both use versions of the Cyrillic alphabet, which is the funny writing lots of people see in movies and things like that. They still write in those scripts. Okay, another question is, aren't they all the same? That's like saying that all English-speaking people are the same, and lots of Ukrainians would find that actually pretty offensive. Most Ukrainians consider themselves Ukrainians and definitely not Russians, even if some of them, especially more towards the east and in certain cities like Odessa, will have family ties to Russia. They will have family in Moscow or in other parts of Russia. One parent may be from Russia, the other from Ukraine, and they may speak Russian inside their house, but they are not all the same. Russian culture is different to Ukrainian culture. They share some similarities in terms of history, but it is not exactly the same. Okay, so that's something that hopefully is cleared up. Are the regions different? Yes, they are. Being such a large country, Ukraine has quite a few different regions. They tend to differ from east to west in terms of culture and language. Kind of similar to here in Australia, although us Westerners are better, of course. The east of Ukraine tends to be more Russian speaking, and the further west you go, the more Ukrainian. But that being said, most people in the country identify themselves as Ukrainian, no matter what language they speak at home, and no matter where they are located in the country. Okay, to be a little bit more in detail about that, and I won't go too far, there are two provinces or regions in the east of Ukraine, okay, which have basically broken away from the country using Russian military force, and they are separatist regions. Of course, they do not generally identify themselves as Ukrainians. They would probably identify themselves as Russians, okay, but not every single person living in those places would be that way. Okay, so like I said, it's a complicated issue, and that's why I'm making this video, to help people understand. Okay, how bad is the situation generally? Well, it depends. For Europe, it's some of the worst hostility since the Bosnian or the war in Kosovo. A whole country may disappear and change Europe forever. The fact is that Europe will never be the same after this, to be honest. It's one of those game-changing events. There are both military and civilian casualties already. Ukrainian troops are fighting hard, especially in Kiev, the capital, and Kharkov in the northeast. 100,000 people have already left for the borders, and more than 1 million are expected to leave soon if things continue. Imagine tanks rolling down the center of Melbourne, or bullets whizzing near the Opera House. Missiles hitting, the central of any city in Australia with tall buildings. That's happening in the capital in Kiev right now. Imagine being near the airport and suddenly you see drones flying over and there's explosions. That's happening at the moment all around the country. So it is a very serious situation. Okay, some people might say, oh, I heard about Ukraine back in 2014. Well, there's a good reason for that, because the two regions I mentioned before, okay, they broke away from Ukraine and decided to become Russian-backed states. Crimea was also annexed, which means taken away from Ukraine through a vote, where it decided to become an autonomous region and broke away from Ukraine. There was violence in other cities between pro-Russian groups and pro-Ukrainian groups. And a very famous event happened in Odessa where people were attacked and burnt in a fire inside one of the main administrative buildings in Odessa. So, there is fierce tension between those two groups within the country. However, like I said, the vast majority of Ukrainians consider themselves pro-Ukrainian and they love their country. Okay. What is the West doing? Okay, so some people might say, well, where is the West's response to this? What's happening? Okay, again, this is an extremely complex and very diverse sort of thing to answer. So I'll keep it quite short. The usual condemnation and sanctions. I have to say, for my personal opinion, condemnations mean nothing, especially to people in autocratic countries and states where they don't take much respect or influence from words like "we condemn." that means nothing to these people. They respect force. Okay, so the other part is sanctions. So economic sanctions, okay, which basically put strangleholds on people's economics in their country. Okay, many argue that this is not enough. Okay, many Ukrainians want to be NATO-backed and distance themselves from Russia and Putin. That's one of the major points of the conflict, although some people who are more cynical may say that's not actually the real reason. It's because Putin wants imperialist ambitions and he wants to take over more land for Russia itself and to boost his popularity within the country. Others may say that it's more to do with NATO and NATO states. Okay, from my personal opinion, it's a combination of both. Okay, but there are many different theories, and you can literally search the internet. You will find hundreds of different theories and reasoning as to why this is happening. Another thing is that the West is not helping militarily by putting boots on the ground, other than defensive weapons. What do I mean by defensive weapons? Well, weapons which will attack planes and helicopters in the air to shoot them down. Also maybe providing health, first aid and things like that. However, generally speaking, offensive weapons would be something to probably attack, Russian bases and things like that, which I'm not sure is the case at the moment. Things may change. I hope they do. Other EU countries are now starting to close their airspace to Russian planes. And I've just read an update that Turkey has agreed to block Russian military ships. However, whether that will actually happen remains to be seen, as it's a relatively new update after saying that they wouldn't do so. Okay, misinformation. Okay, this is a big one. This word gets used a lot. This is a major issue because the Russian media is well known throughout the world for producing propaganda. It's one tool they have to keep their people under control. I can imagine some people who watch this who are pro-Russian would say that's not true. There is a lot of evidence to say that it is, okay? For example, Russian television has stated that the reason why that they are attacking Ukraine is well, Putin said this himself, is that basically to protect the separatist regions in the east, which saying that basically Ukrainians are killing their own people, which is blatantly not true. It doesn't want to attack the eastern regions. That's why the peace is held since 2014, and they have no intention of attacking Russia, which would be suicidal in their case. The vast majority of Ukrainians, and including the government, want peace and to be able to pursue their destiny as a country, okay, which may or may not include joining NATO at some stage. Okay, this isn't the first time this has happened, okay? There are other countries, for some of you, you may know Georgia, which is a country in the Caucasus region, east of Ukraine. If you go further beyond the eastern borders of Ukraine, you'll find a country called Georgia, okay, on the Black Sea there. They had this same issue. There was a war fought there as well against separatists, and the same in Moldova as well, okay, and now it continues in Ukraine. Okay, this is a very basic overview. I hope it's helped out some people out there, especially here in Australia where things are kind of filtered. Most people don't have a connection to Ukraine. I do because I live there. My wife is Ukrainian. My newborn son is half Ukrainian. And I thank God every day that we moved away just before COVID hit. So, and it's extremely emotionally disheartening for us to see what's happening over there. And it's something that affects people right to their core. It affects your life, it affects your sleep, it affects your stress levels, and it's very difficult to stop thinking about it. I also feel powerless to a degree to help people. I've messaged a whole bunch of my old students to check if they're okay, and business people I used to work with and things like that. Thankfully, I haven't heard of reports of anybody I know personally dying, but there have been civilian casualties. And this affects ordinary people. It affects women. It affects children, and it affects the men who have to fight. The rule is, if you are between 18 and 60, you may get called up for service to fight. And a lot of volunteers have volunteered already. In fact, they have so many volunteers that they cannot arm them all. So I plead to the Australian government to send arms to Ukraine to help arm the Ukrainian population. I plead with the Australian government to grant refugee status to people seeking refuge in Australia, like my family, for example, my Olga's parents, who are fleeing the country. And I would like to see the West do more than sanctions. I believe a lot of this could have been prevented from unilateral action from the beginning, and we allowed this to happen. I've also set up a GoFundMe for my parents-in-law trying to get into Australia. Any donations would be much appreciated. If you can spare it, I don't expect anybody to donate. It's totally fine if you don't feel comfortable doing that or don't want to. I'm totally cool with that. And I thank you for your time. Please share this video. Please put it out there. It's something that I felt, it's something small that I felt that I could do to help my family and to help the people of Ukraine.